All right, Hawk Newsome is making some news. I know Hawk, and he's a leader of Black Lives Matter in New York. And when I was talking to him, I was trying to see if we could find some solutions, like specific things that we could recommend. We got a little bit of progress on making a list of things that you could actually do. And I think some of those were considered in the Tim Scott bill and the Kamala Harris bill, et cetera. So some of them have bubbled up, not necessarily because of us, but they were just good ideas. And I broke my contact with Hawk because he needed, for his purposes, to be more provocative than I was willing to be associated with. In other words, he was more willing to call white people racist and suggest indirectly or directly that maybe violence could be productive. And those are thoughts that I didn't want to be associated with. So I broke contact with him. But he's making news again. And I want to break out something he said because I think it needs some interpretation. So he said, quote, "If this country doesn't give us what we want in terms of fixing systemic racism, etc., if this country doesn't give us what we want, then we will burn down the system and replace it." Newsome responded, "All right, and I could be speaking figuratively. I could be speaking literally. It's a matter of interpretation." Let's be very real and observe the history of the 60s. Blah, blah. Anyway, he makes good points that violence has been productive and a part of American fabric, and including gun ownership, and why are we so afraid if black people have guns, etc. So those are actually some good and interesting contextual points. But here's the part I wanted to point out. He says that we'll burn down the system and replace it. And then he says, all right, and I could be speaking figuratively and I could be speaking literally. It's a matter of interpretation. Now, who says something and then in the very next sentence they tell you that you could interpret it in two different ways? Who does that? Because normally when you communicate, don't you tell people what you mean? Here's how I do it. Well, there are two ways to interpret this. I want to be clear that this is the way I'm saying it. Isn't that the way you would communicate if you wanted people to actually really understand what you're thinking? I know there's two ways to see it, but I'm telling you this is the way I see it, and I'm communicating it this way. I'm not talking about that other way to see it. But Hawk did a completely unexpected thing. Oh, no, you're not. If you think this is going to be a criticism, you're on the wrong page. This is going to be a compliment to skill. Now, I've told you I'm going to be consistent about this. Regardless of whether somebody has the political opinions that I do, if they employ skill, I'm going to call it out. All right? Because I think you need to learn the skill part, and then you can apply it to your own moral and ethical world. But this was very skillful. It looks like just a weird sentence, but it's really skillful, and here's why. Hawk is talking to two separate audiences, and he found a way to talk to them simultaneously, which I've never seen before. He needs to talk to his radical base in a way that suggests he's on board with actual violence, like burning stuff down, because they need to hear that. Now, am I reading his mind? No, he told me that. He told me that directly. He told me that he needs to be more radical or he would lose his base. Direct language. There's no interpretation here going on. So, was this language in which he says burn down the system, does that speak to his base? Yes, very well. And how do they interpret it? They say, looks like burning down stuff is on the table. Looks like a little bit of violence Hawk is in favor of. So that's how they would interpret it. Later, if he's challenged, and he will be, by white people, he'll say, hey, you could take this as figurative. And I said that when I said it. I said you could take this as figurative. So take it as figurative. And then white people who don't like his message won't, and they'll just have their own opinion, but they were going to anyway. But the white people who are sort of supporting Black Lives Matter but don't want to think they're part of anything violent do have the option of interpreting it as figurative. In other words, he found a way to talk to the, let's say, Antifa and the white protesters who are siding with Black Lives Matter. He found a way to talk to them. At the same time, he was saying essentially the opposite thing to Black Lives Matter. And he pulled it off. He actually pulled it off. Because everybody who reads this is just going to see what they want to see. And I've never seen anybody say it directly. He goes, it's a matter of interpretation. He actually put that right into the original statement. You've never seen that before. and if you had imagined that this was a good idea and you were not trained in this, you would say that's not a good idea. And how is that a good idea to say two things that are opposite and say you can interpret it any way you want? How is that not the worst idea in the world? Here's what you're missing. Hawk is good at this. He's really good at this. You don't know how smart he is. I do. I spent enough time talking to him that he's really smart. And he does understand this stuff. And this is not an accident. The fact that he found a way to square a circle that I would have thought wasn't even a thing, he pulled it off. All right? Now, I'm not supporting his message or anything like that, so don't take it like that. I'm just saying skill-wise, pretty good skill.